Members of council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Members, before we return to the agenda, I want to make a brief announcement regarding the Children's Breakfast Club Acts of Kindness Challenge. The club has asked members of council to sign an apron, which will be used as a prize for one of the winning schools in the Acts of Kindness Challenge. If you would like to sign the apron, it is in the back area of the council chambers. And we'd like all the men to sign that apron. Before the recess, council was considering the mayor's second key matter, EX 13.2, on the capital and operating budget. We will now return to questions of staff. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Perhaps I can maybe go down to the next one. We're just waiting for Tracy Cook to get back. I have some questions for her, so I'll just go to the next one if I could. Oh, she's there now? Oh, here she comes. You good? Thank you, through you, Madam Speaker. Tracy, I want to talk about the transit expansion office. That kind of runs through your area?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, it does.
Transit. So the TTC is involved in that in some way, but that goes through you.
Yes, sir.
I want to talk to you about the waterfront transit reset that we have on the books. We've gone to 30% design, I believe.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's my understanding, yes.
To get to 30% design, that's probably going to cost a few bucks to get to that design. Where does that money come from, the 30% design?
So I do know that prior transit priorities have been identified for funding in prior council direction. We know we have a variety of places where those funds come from, including engagement with other levels of government, PTIF funding, et cetera. So it's a variety of sources of funds.
But this one here comes from the waterfront, is that correct, the 30%?
I think it's a mix between the Waterfront Revitalization Initiative and corporate initiatives budgets.
Yeah, so I think the answer, there's a lot of other projects in design that are not funded, this is being one of them, like Eglinton Avenue East, that's not funded, but that's in design stage.
Right, so through you, Madam Speaker, the Eglinton East LRT project is actually going through work supported by PTIF 1 funding for design to a certain level.
Okay, so when we get to the 30% design, that's complete, and there's a wish list from many councillors around here, whether it be bus routes, closing the gap on the western waterfront, which is a priority for my ward. After that gets done, and a council kind of prioritizes, how do we go and get that money? Because we can't pay for it. We got to go to our partners in the federal and provincial government. How does it go from there?
So certainly through Madam Speaker, once we've got a better sense of what we're looking at and moving through that stage gate approach to a 30% level of design where we can come back to council and provide some high level estimates or at least seek direction on advancing the project. And at that time will be a discussion around funding opportunities, including any programs that may still be existing with the provincial and federal government. But absolutely, there's a commitment to speaking with the other levels of government.
Yeah, so being selfish on the waterfront reset, closing the gap, we would say, here's what we believe this is to be. Council makes a decision, and then we would go to our federal partners and our provincial partners saying, this is what it is, this is the council's priority list, we want to move this forward, and an opportunity opens up, we're ready to pounce on it, correct?
Yeah, through you, Madam Speaker, yes, sir.
So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where's money coming from?
Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you, got a couple of questions regarding a fare pass. By now, we're supposed to have rolled out the program providing discount fares on OW and ODSP recipients in Phase 1, childcare subsidy and housing subsidy recipients in Phase 2, and all other low-income families in Phase 3. But we're stalled. OW, ODSP, and childcare subsidy recipients have the program, but people in social housing do not, and we don't have system in place for providing the pass to low-income residents. Can you tell us why?
Through the speaker. So the plan had included having housing allowance, housing subsidy recipients to be part of Phase 2, along with those who are receiving child care subsidies. However, when staff went to process the development of phase 2, we discovered that there was not stored records of income verification for those who are in receipt of housing subsidies. So we had to make the choice to roll that group of eligible residents into the third phase, which would be for all low-income residents. One of the principles of the Fair Pass program is to not add undue or unnecessary administrative burden to low-income Torontonians.
All right, just for clarity, what steps are we taking to overcome the obstacles to delivering this program as we promised to low-income residents in our city? Just for clarity purposes, please.
Oh, absolutely. So in the staff recommended budget for 2020 for my division, social development, there includes resources to develop phase 3. We are on track to deliver the beginning of phase 3 in April, May of 2021. In our budget outlook for 2021 and 2022 is the full cost for the full implementation of the program.
With this process in place to address the obstacles, are you now budgeting for full implementation for low-income social housing tenants for other low-income residents in 2021, or should those people expect more delays? Can I tell low-income families in my ward that the pass is coming, or should I tell them that we may renege again in 2021?
So through the speaker, you can certainly tell your residents in your ward, as well as other low-income residents across the city, that the staff commitment and the resourcing in the budget is to allow us to be on track for delivery for April, May of 2021.
Is there any reason that staff commitment and or whatever else might slow us down and we might not be on target on April 2021?
So
Is there any obstacles, any hiccups that you might see forthcoming?
Sure. In keeping with that principle of no undue administrative burden, we are working with the Technology Services Division as well as Revenue Services to piggyback on their automated income verification pilot with Canada Revenue Agency. That is an important component for us to be able to seamlessly administer Fair Pass to all low-income Torontonians who do not receive subsidy from the city currently.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. A first question to Shelter Support and Housing, if I may. We are in a homeless emergency, and there are a lot of calls for us to be opening up more spaces and beds. Do you feel you have the necessary resources in this budget to address the pressure that the city's being put on under right now?
Through the Speaker. Council last year during the budget debate gave Shelter Support and Housing a significant amount of money to address capacity issues, to open 1,000 new shelter beds over the next 3 years. We are on track to do that. In fact, we have located about 80% of the beds, and we're on track to secure the rest of the locations before the end of the year, and hopefully have about 80% of them open by the end of this year.
Now, outside of emergency shelters, I know we have other programs that try to engage those that are sleeping rough on our streets that are probably most at risk. Do you again feel that your budget has the necessary resources to respond to the emergency that we have on Toronto City streets?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. It was one of the few new and enhanced requests that we did put through this budget because of the additional vulnerability. And so we are seeking some additional outreach dollars and have received those in this submission. So we're looking forward to having that.
Now, I've asked this question at committee and again at executive about the eviction prevention program. EPIC is a program where we make an investment in keeping people in their homes. Can't remember how I asked this before, but I'm going to try. What is the return on our investment? How much is the return on our investment when we invest in eviction prevention like the EPIC program?
So as part of the pilot, we did have an evaluation of the EPIC program. It did tell us from the small number of people that we were able to help through the pilot that we got a 3-to-1 return on investment.
3-to-1 return on the investment when we do eviction prevention because it keeps people out of shelters, correct? Okay, thank you. To our General Manager of Transportation, if I could, do you think you have the necessary resources in your proposed budget to address the growing public safety issue we have on city streets and roadways?
Through the speaker, I believe after we've done our reorganization and tried to find where we had some capacity within our organization, we've done that, and we've come back to council and asked for quite specifically staff resources to advance Vision Zero. I want to see how those play out so that we can increase delivery and get more interventions out on the street. And then if we don't find that's adequate, we would come back in a future budget year.
So this is about fully implementing your capital budget. You're going to address that 60% versus 85% where it probably should be.
We're at 82% this year.
82, sorry.
Just saying, yeah.
Thank you very much. To the General Manager of Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, with the additional money that were put in the budget at the Budget Committee, are you able to fully implement the ravine strategy this year rather than next year, to the best of your ability?
Through the speaker, the Ravine Strategy Report recommended the implementation and the budget begin in 2021. And through this budget process and through the consideration of the report at committee, we were able to advance that investment to this year, to the 2020 budget, and we feel there is adequate resources in the budget for that
And
this
you
year.
believe you have the adequate resources to implement the facilities master plan as we passed it in, I don't know, December?
So through the speaker, we have, through this budget, implemented many of the items on the appropriate track that have been recommended in the plan and that council has approved. And also in the budget, in the notes on the capital plan, and as some of the other discussions that took place this morning, there continues to be an unfunded state of good repair item from that plan. But my understanding is it will be part of future discussions around many other state of good repair backlogs.
Thank you very much. And then finally to Mr. Baxter from Energy and Environment, two-part question because I'm running out of time here. I want to get all the words out. One, do you feel you have enough resources in the presented operating and capital budget to implement the third year of Transform TO as it was previously conceived?
I believe we do.
And second, is it true that next year, as part of the next phase of Transform TO, with our new target, the 2021 year is where we will see an accelerated program and funding or resources to implement that program to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and respond to the climate emergency that we've declared?
Yeah, as per the directions of the climate emergency back in October, and through the speaker, we will be bringing to council in Q4 of this year our plan for the net zero plan to get to 2050. So that will be a direction for the 2022 budget year.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask our housing division, I'm going to ask Ms. Bedard, around EPIC. What work does EPIC do in preventing or assisting in evictions?
So through the speaker, some of the most important elements of EPIC. One, the team is mobile, so it travels to the family that is in crisis. We provide support in the form of rental arrears, mediation with the landlord, layering on of additional supports to stabilize someone in their current housing. If the tenancy can't be saved, we also assist the person to find new housing. And the goal of the whole program is to make sure that that person does not end up in the shelter system.
Thank you. I'd just like to also ask Ms. Bond and welcome you here to your first big council meeting and budget meeting. We're currently just looking at the number of renovictions. There was a story lately that showed quite a large number of renovictions where whole apartment buildings and blocks, larger housing estates are having people sent out supposedly to do repairs. Is there anywhere in the budget that we have staff that are dedicated to looking at what assistance we need in order to coordinate city departments to basically assist those tenants once they hit the landlord and tenant board? Or maybe you don't know that, but I'm going to ask.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. We do have staff working on our team right now. Part of their work in the immediate future is working with a new renters advisory committee, and that includes housing advocates and also people with lived experience in renters who are providing advice to staff about some of the issues that renters are facing. So we have people within the team who are working on that, and also with some of the landlords as well. So we're hoping to report the results of that work back to council, and hopefully with some recommendations that we can bring forward.
There's no dedicated budget line in 2020.
That's right.
I would expect that perhaps in 2021, there might be a budget line that would say, along with eviction prevention, that here's what we have to do around renovictions, whether it's N12s or N13s.
Yeah, maybe subject to those recommendations from the
Okay.
committee.
Thank you very much. I wanted to also ask the Toronto Police if they are here and teed up. Could you hold my time, please, Speaker, while they're coming down? What? Well, while I'm waiting for that, perhaps I'll just ask city staff that according to something I've read lately, that there was a drop of almost $30 million in 2014 due to falling numbers of traffic tickets. Is that, are you going to corroborate that? That was a spokesperson, Cheryl St. Juan, who I believe is city spokesperson. Who is going to answer that?
We'll find somebody to.
I think we need more chairs here, I'm just going to suggest, so that staff have a place to sit. We've got a lot of empty space.
Through the speaker to the chair.
A lot of space
Through the
empty.
speaker to.
Pardon, I'm
Through
sorry.
the speaker to the counselor, yes, that number is correct.
That number is correct. Okay. And then I don't know where police, oh, they're right there. Thank you very much. And I
The police
assume,
are there. The police.
thank you. They're behind me, and my eyes, I
Yeah, I know.
can't see.
Yeah.
Back of my head not working. So I understand that the number of tickets and the number of revenues, and we've just heard from the city staff that that's a pretty significant drop, $30 million from 2014. And over the last 10 years, it appears gone from 60 million to only 13.9 million, and a drop in tickets issued from 200,000 to 700,000. From 700,000 tickets to 200,000. And I'm just wondering if, though, you'd like to comment on those numbers?
Madam Speaker, I appreciate what the council brought to the attention. There has been a drop, and the Toronto Police Service is very aware of this drop. And as a result, we have, for the 2020 budget, we have 8 dedicated officers assigned to traffic services, and they have been starting their traffic enforcement since January 1st, 2020. They're going through each ward, and they're looking at traffic patterns and traffic hotspots. Having said that,
Thank you. Because I'm going to ask another question, and that is, do you have that information by division, by TPS division, as far as all of the tickets that are given out?
we can certainly
division?
analyze that, yes.
So if I was to ask for that to be provided to committee, that could be provided?
That's readily available.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry to cut you off, but I was going to get cut off.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry to make musical chairs happen, but my question is related to housing. And it's,
Okay, just,
thanks.
so maybe
Thanks.
what we can do, you're working?
Yeah,
Okay.
Mr. Elvidge is advanced notifying, so they were pretty quick to get into place.
Okay.
Thank you, I appreciate that. The city building fund investments, with great fanfare, we assured the residents that they're going to transit and housing. The transit piece, I think, was made more clear. It's the larger of the two, sums over 3 years, and it's I think widely known now that we'll see some purchase of vehicles, that we'll see a lot of fix of line 2. It's less clear where the money goes that will go directly from the city building fund levy into housing. will there be a report out that sort of tracks that and lets us know what's happening over the next 3 years with that additional investment?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, we're still working on some of the details on that, but we plan to bring an implementation plan back to council in June and regular annual reporting as well, so we can include an update at that time.
Oh, okay, so it's not 100% set yet. It was a little easier to do that in transit because there were some immediate needs.
That's correct. So we're still working on some of that detail, and we're happy to bring some more of that detail back to council.
Okay, thank you. That's my housing question. The other one I think is easy because I think it's just a question for finance staff. And I asked this already during budget, but I just wanted to highlight it. Is a motion needed from council, or can we expect it through staff? There was a motion last year that the evaluation report of the participatory budgeting pilot come back to a regular business meeting so that participants would have a chance to make a deputation about whether or not they agreed with or wanted to supplement or disagreed with the evaluation report. Is that delayed and will happen in 2020, or a motion would be needed to make that happen?
Through you, Madam Speaker. Councillor, as you know, through the budget modernization piece, we are contemplating how to engage with the public, and that is part of our 4-year strategy. The part that you're referencing is something that has happened in the past.
Right.
That we're happy to actually hear about the successes and the learning opportunities from that to help us inform how we're going to engage with the public going forward.
So the evaluation report could be there on the table in front of councillors as a result, if we provided that opportunity as part of the consultation.
So through you, Madam Speaker, we're happy to contemplate how that comes forward. I don't think at this point any decision has been made on how that information will be shared.
So maybe not, I won't move a motion today, we can chat offline about how that could happen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and through you to staff. This is regarding Yonge Dundas Square. So economic development staff, are you here and close to a microphone? Oh, you are, okay, great, thank you. So with respect to the budget that was approved by the Board of Management, and the one that is being presented before us today, there's a difference of $187,000. Is that not correct?
I think Taylor would be better placed to answer this. Somebody from YDS.
Oh, okay. We have Taylor. Thank you. Madam Speaker, do you mind holding my time? Thank you.
I did.
I appreciate that.
Who is here to answer your question?
He's the general manager of Yonge Dundas Square.
Okay.
Taylor, nice to see you. This is Taylor Roth, everyone. He's the GM of Yonge Dundas Square. There was a budget that was approved by the Board of Management, which is different than the one that's proposed as a staff recommended budget before us today. The difference is $187,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what exactly will that additional $187,000 that the Board of Management is requesting of council? What will those dollars be spent on, and for what reason?
So through you, Madam Speaker, the Board of Management has been on a zero net budget for the last 2 years, through 2018 and 2019. When the board went to a zero net budget, it was working under the premise that the conditions that we were operating under would not change and that they were stable. What we have found in the last couple of years is that illicit activity has grown in the square in the immediate vicinity and to a dramatic extent. And the board had asked for reports from Toronto Police Services, from Public Safety Canada, and from City Corporate Security, all of which recommended that there should be a very basic minimum amount of security being provided on the square for the safety of the people who are on the square and for the people who are providing security on the square, that minimum being 2 people on the square at any given time as security staff.
And would it be reasonable to say, or is it accurate, that all around us in the downtown quadrant, we've seen increase requirement for security, for example, for Cadillac Fairview, for Ryerson University, for Ten Dundas, which operates AMC's theater. Would it be fair to say that that all those different adjacent neighbors have increased their security as well?
Through you, Madam Speaker, dramatically so. This has been a priority for the Board of Management to be able to address this concern. We have, unlike some buildings, we cannot lock our doors. So we are open 24 hours a day, every day of the year. We do have washrooms underground that are used for activities we would wish were not taking place in our washrooms. And it's really kind of unsafe for us to have one security guard go down and investigate those underground facilities on their own.
Okay, thank you very much. My next set of questions is actually for the Toronto Public Library regarding the youth hubs. Right behind you. Oh, great. Oh, hello. Great, thank you so much. So with respect to the intention to roll out additional youth hubs, specifically in library venues, what physical changes to the library or does need to take place in order for the youth hubs to be introduced, or are there no physical changes required?
Through the speaker, we have to make a few physical changes in some of the locations.
Can we turn on the mic?
The red light is on.
Oh, there it is. It's on now.
Okay.
Is it on?
So we have to make some changes in, some minor changes in physical locations, but we've done that assessment before identifying the locations for the youth hubs, and they're very minor, or in some cases, changes don't have to be made. So those are minor for the most part.
That's very encouraging to hear. And do the Toronto Public Library staff need additional resources or perhaps training in order for them to create these youth hubs? Because it's not a quiet, contemplative library space anymore. It now becomes a dynamic hangout space for young people.
Well, we've identified two librarians per youth hub, and those librarians work the hours of the youth hub, and they have special expertise in this area. And then in addition to that, we work with the staff in the branch who understand their role in supporting the youth hubs as well.
Okay, so it sounds like you will have everything you need to roll this out successfully. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question is regarding recreation, and specifically about the demand of recreation. In your 2019 status update on the implementation of the growth plan and community recreation, I believe that the wait list is sitting at 96,000 people. Is that correct?
So through the speaker, that's correct. In 2019, it was sitting at 196,000 individual waitlist spots, which represents, I think, around 60 or 70,000 individuals who may be on many different waitlists. But I should say in the year previous, before the growth plan was implemented, it was at 215,000. So we have seen a significant drop in the waitlist as a result of the advancement of the growth plan.
Thank you. That was your last question? No, sorry, that was your last question. Councillor Holliday?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's a number of financial motions in the paper before us, but I highlighted one that is a report request, and it's item number 142. So I think I need to ask the TTC about this one.
Okay, so you want TTC to come down?
Thank you.
Okay, they're here.
Wonderful. The motion, I'll read it very quickly. City Council requests the City Manager in consultation with the CEO, Toronto Transit Commission, to report back to City Council on a long-term strategy to reduce the share of the TTC's operating budget covered by fares to be no more than 50% of the overall cost. What is the amount that is attributed to the fare box right now? If the motion is asking for a process to get it to there to 50%.
So through the speaker, today the fare box provides 59% of the revenue to cover the TTC's expenses, and that's roughly $1.3 billion.
Okay.
To reduce that to a 50% fare box ratio would require an additional subsidy from the city of $184 million, or 23% increase.
$184 million. And so, you know, you're in charge of operating the TTC. Do you care if it comes from the fare box or from some other source? You need the money either way. I'm just trying to understand what the effect of this might be, if there's a path, it says for you to report on a path to get to that, in consultation with the city manager, to be fair. But I don't know what you would say, because you just rely on the revenue. It doesn't matter where it comes from, am I correct?
So through the speaker, yes, as long as it's a predictable and sustainable funding source.
Any sense on what, so the fare is going, it's $3.20, it's going up for, you know, a prepaid fare or a Presto fare. What does that translate to roughly, you know, 10, 20, 30 cents? I'm assuming it could be translated to a subsidy per ride. It's $182 million.
So 10 cents is generating about 35 million for the TTC.
About 60 cents.
Yes.
Okay, so a 60-cent subsidy from other sources. Do you think that a 60-cent change in fare would have a radical impact on ridership? I'm just trying to get to where, you know, the rationale behind what this motion could lead to.
So through the speaker, if we were to raise the additional money through the fare box, then it wouldn't necessarily meet the 50% fare box ratio, but so it would have to come from potentially tax funding.
Yep. But would that radically change? I'm assuming that would lower fares. Would that radically change things? Would suddenly a wave of people come and ride the TTC because it was 60 cents less?
So through the speaker, it would mean that the fares would stay at today's rates because you would freeze them so that the other funding source could increase it. So it wouldn't necessarily, unless we were starting to lower that to replace it.
And that would be like over 6 years or something if it's 10 cents
Yes.
a year. If I may ask the city manager, just in terms of order of magnitude, $184 million. I mean, I'm assuming you don't have a printing press for money down in the basement. I mean, what kind of property tax increase would that be? Or is there some other secret place to get $184 million?
So through the speaker, it's approximately 6% increase just for that amount alone. But I'll draw your attention to the report that council approved back in the fall of last year. The terms of reference that's been guiding the subway expansion program identified 3 areas of focus. One dealt with the notion of uploading the subway, which we've dealt with. The second dealt with the expansion of subways, which, as you know, there's 4 projects that we're focused on. The third dealt with this notion of transit governance and revenues. And so that terms of reference was signed by both the province and agreed to by council. So it is my responsibility to go and work with the province and possibly other municipal partners in Southern Ontario to see whether or not there is an opportunity to generate a revenue source which would cover what you're talking about.
But to be fair, am I correct that the Ontario government is putting in something like $29 billion in capital? So, you know, there's operating and then there's capital, and then there's a whole bunch of sources of capital, which would include the property tax base and would include other orders of government.
Right, and through the speaker, I mean, again, the amount of the expansion that the province is focused on is in the order of about 29 billion. The state of good repair overall for transit is in the order of about 33.5 billion. So even though we've made great progress in this budget towards dealing with state of good repair, we still have a long road ahead of us. So again, I think, as you recall back in the 90s, there was actually, for both capital and operating, support that came from other people other than the City of Toronto. So it's a concept that was here before. It's a concept that I think we need to revisit. And I see that as part of the responsibility that's outlined in the terms of reference which you approved last fall.
Thank you. Okay, go to speakers now. Councillor Bradford, would you mind if we have Councillor Crawford speak first as the chair of the Budget Committee? Is that okay with everyone? Okay, Councillor Crawford.
I can appreciate that. I do have a motion that I'd like to move. That City Council increase the 2020 operating budget for Yonge Dundas Square by 187,000 gross, 0 net, including for a one-time 187 draw from the tax stabilization reserve for enhanced square security, as Councillor Wong-Tam was mentioning. It's here. Anyway, and then a report to follow on that. So, first of all, I do want to thank a number of people, as I have done at budget and at executive. A lot of people came together to put this budget together. Of course, you have the CFO, the city manager, you have financial planning, you have all the divisions and agencies, and we're seeing a lot of them actually here today as we're asking questions, work incredibly hard over the entire year to pull this budget together. I want to also thank the mayor and his leadership, not only the mayor, but his staff. When you're putting something like this together over weeks and months, a lot of people involved in that. It was the leadership that he has brought, I think, to this whole table here that has shown that we can work together. Even when we have the differences, we do have the ability to work together. So I just want to thank him for the work that he's been doing. And of course, my budget committee members who work incredibly hard. One thing I learned many, many years ago is you really get a sense of how the city works when you see how the dollars are spent. And I think some of the new councillors who are on board have realized that. So I want to thank them. And of course, the public. This is a very open and transparent process, has been mentioned before. And it is something that is incredibly important when you're looking at municipal
I'm
politics.
sorry, Councillor Crawford. Okay, there's too much noise in the council chambers. Please, staff, members of council. Councillor Cole, please. Okay, continue.
Anyway, I want to thank the public for coming out. Hundreds of people came out over a number of weeks to depute, to talk to us, to give us their opinions and additions and what they may have thought they wanted in the budget. And I think you actually saw that in motions that have come forward through budget and through executive and probably here today. So I want to thank the public for the work. As budget chair, as budget chief, I have two main focuses that drives me and I've been doing over the last number of years. Number one, keeping taxes as low as possible and keeping the city affordable for the citizens. Making sure that we manage the money well. $13.5 billion in this budget. We need to ensure that we're accountable and we manage the money well for everybody. Looking for efficiencies, modernization, reorganization, doing things differently, being fiscally responsible and fiscally prudent, and keeping our house in order. We need to keep our house in order, and we need to show the public that we are keeping our house in order. And I take pride in ensuring that with all the staff and everybody around, we do that and we show that day after day. $890 million as a good example in efficiencies we have achieved over the last year. $100 million alone in this budget. We have healthy reserves. We have $5 billion that are managed in our reserves. And through our new investment board, we are managing that well, and we'll continue to do that in the future. We are managing our capital plan much better, and I think you'll see that over the years as we move forward. We are modernizing the budget process. That's something that's not talked a lot about, and probably a lot of people don't want to know much about it, but we are actually modernizing the budget process to make sure that it works better. My second focus has been to reinvest the savings that we have been finding within the city budget back into the city, and ensuring that we protect the services. And in fact, not only protect them, but increase the investments that we've been doing. In this budget alone, I think there's 75, 77. We probably will top out a little under $80 million in new investments into this budget. And when you talk about some of the investments that we're doing, you look at affordable housing, you look at Toronto Community Housing, the largest investment we have made in Toronto Community Housing in the city's history. When we're looking at the TTC, almost doubling the state of good repair, recognizing that, yes, it comes on with the 1.5% city building fund, but we are investing and we will continue to do that. When you're looking at poverty reduction, there's more in this here for the environment. There's more police officers, more TTC operators, more paramedics. $11.9 billion, as I mentioned, for the TTC, almost double what we did last year. And yes, we have extended the city building fund to raise over $5 billion for transit. You got new subways, you got signal systems, you got buses, streetcars. More is coming, and we need more, and I recognize that we have to continue to invest more. But we can't do this alone. We need our federal partners, and as we have said time and time again, to build the city that we need to build, we need the partners with the federal government and the province. I know they have stepped up to the plate and will continue to do that. Madam Speaker, this is a good news budget, and I'm very pleased that we are here today to be able to make a decision on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. I have a motion to move here, and that is that City Council requests the CEO of the TTC, as part of the upcoming fare policy review, to develop a consistent approach to calculating any future fare changes for monthly concession passes, with the goal of applying changes evenly and fairly, and address the findings of the review in the 2021 TTC budget submission. So this motion is basically asking the TTC to make sure that we include a rational and consistent approach as part of the fare review that the board has already approved and is moving forward with. I think at the October council meeting, we had a very helpful motion from Councillor Layton and Councillor Wong Tam asking the TTC board to look at the ways to improve the student discount fares in light of the provincial cuts to some of the university funding in OSAP. That motion was to come back as part of the 2020 budget, but I think the timeline was a little tight on that. And we know that in October, a lot of things are already underway. So what we're doing here is to make that connection between the work that's actually happening at the TTC board that's underway right now, and give us a practical opportunity to really evolve from sort of the ad hoc and incremental approach that we take to fare review, where we come at it each year, budget cycle after budget cycle, and try and build a more systematic approach that aligns with a lot of our policy objectives that we set here in council. So whether we're looking at the poverty reduction strategy, youth equity strategy, transform TO, all of these things need to be considered in their entirety and integrated into that conversation about fare. So if we're going to move away from that ad hoc decision-making process or doing fares on the fly, I'm hoping that this is something we can all get behind and have a consistent approach that we can move forward with in the 2021 budget. So with respect to this year's budget, I do want to thank everyone who's been involved in working on these budgets. It's a lot of time and energy, obviously, for everybody that goes into kind of tweaking the budget at the margins. It's a very large budget, and what we discuss and debate over is a small fraction of that. But as the mayor was alluding to earlier this morning, that hard work takes place months in advance in the lead up to this budget, and staff really do a tremendous amount of time working with councillors, working with the different divisions and agencies to bring something forward that really works for us here in Toronto. I think it's exceptional that this year we have the unique opportunity to expand our investments in infrastructure with the City Building Fund. And I would like to congratulate the mayor and, of course, our budget chief, Councillor Crawford, on the work on championing that and steering that through budget committee and landing on something that I think is, frankly, a generational investment. As one of the younger voices here on council, a new addition to the chamber, we've had a lot of youth in the audience today, and this is something that's really important for everyone to recognize, that the investments and the decisions that we are making today are going to have a big impact in the future. And that's something that's often rare in politics, where budget cycles tend to follow election cycles. But the things that we're teeing up today are really important, and you're going to see those investments down the road. I think that in a city that's as big and complex as Toronto, we're always going to have more needs than we necessarily have resources. That's a product of our ambition. That's a product of the city that we aspirationally want to be. But there is also an important recognition that those challenges are not ours alone to face, and that those are challenges that we are not going to be able to address entirely here on a property tax base. And we did a lot of time doing deputations across the city. We've heard about how transparent our budget process really is. And it's great being on the committee, because you go to Scarborough, you go to North York. I did a lot of door knocking over the past couple weeks, and I talked to residents. They want us moving forward on transit, on affordable housing, on climate change, on gun violence. But these are issues that require collaboration across all levels of government. And the reality is the City of Toronto does a lot of heavy lifting for the region, for the province, and for the federal government. So the money that we're raising today, that we're bringing forward, sends a strong signal that Toronto's coming to the table, that we have ambitions and that we want to get things done. But we do need that collaboration and those partnerships with our provincial and federal partners to really move the needle on some of these key files. I think it's a great budget. I'm happy to support it. Thankful for all the work that everyone's put into getting us where we are today, and looking forward to moving forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have three motions that I will ask the clerks to place before council. The first is regarding Cabbagetown Youth Center. There should be no surprise to my council colleagues that this would be coming. And this is building on top of the report that is supplemental to this particular agenda that was floated by staff, so you can reference that. A second item is regarding increasing the capital budget. Thank you, for street improvement to the St. Lawrence Market neighborhood. That's also before you. And then the third motion, just by way of this motion coming up every single budget cycle, you can anticipate it, and that is to reintroduce the vehicle registration tax. Somebody had to do it, and apparently this is my turn. But Madam Speaker, I just want to speak I want to speak and say thank you to a number of people, and I want to start with the city staff. I want to thank them for the incredible volume of work and care that they put into putting this budget together. And I recognize that this is obviously an accelerated process. I remember there was a particular point in time that we would get the budget out and we would have several months to debate it and to sort of roll it over. So although there has been conversations and language spoken about the budget process being open and transparent, and certainly it is compared to other orders of government, I do recognize that how quickly things are coming to a head, and I just want to thank you because it means that you have many long days and long nights, and we need to extend our gratitude. I also want to thank the mayor and Councillor Crawford in particular and their particular team that works and supports them because I really don't have too many complaints in this budget, and so you can take this one to the bank today. I want to say thank you for working with us, and in particular the communities that I'm serving right now, which includes Cabbagetown as well as Regent Park. And I know that the mayor is going to be standing up on behalf of the residents of Regent very shortly to make sure that the social development plan is funded. And I want to thank him, and in particular, about stepping forward to really lend some support to the Cabbagetown community. Budget Chief Crawford did exactly the same thing at the Budget Committee, which is kind of where we've landed on a very good place. Does this budget solve everything? Well, certainly not. I don't think any budget will solve every single item that we have. But I think that this is, as I noted earlier, we've come a great distance to where we started back in 2010. And not that that was a high watermark, that was a low watermark. But I just want to say that we're building strength upon strength, and I think that's absolutely critical. There's still the growing backlog of state of good repair that we need to dig deeper on, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future years ahead, around transportation, around transit, around road safety, climate resiliency, around resilient and strong neighborhoods, around housing. The Premier's cuts to childcare and Toronto Public Health cannot go unnoticed. Obviously, we are filling a $7.1 million gap this year. Next year, this will balloon out to almost $30 million, which will then put us back into a place of crisis around those particular issues. And we need to be able to get to the province and try to reverse that. We cannot necessarily build a world-class, inclusive, prosperous, or fair city on the back of property taxes. That's already been stated. And I know that we're going to have those tough conversations in the years ahead, and we want to be able to be ready for that. But this particular budget, I want to highlight a few things, and things I believe are very important, including the fact that we are going to be funding, and again, thanks to the mayor's leadership, for the very first time, a gender equality unit. That is significant, Madam Speaker, because it hasn't been done before. And it is under this leadership of this council that it's going to happen. We also see significant dollars coming in for the Downtown East Action Plan, and that rolls out an enhanced level of service for us who are representing and working and studying and investing in Downtown East, because it's absolutely critical, just as you heard, that Yonge Dundas Square is asking for a little bit more money so that they can do their job effectively. We in the downtown core need to do the same, and this particular budget responds to that. Finally, it just would I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the vehicle registration tax. canceled in 2011, foregone revenues of $55 million every year. We're almost 10 years on the anniversary of that tax cancellation. We have lost and said goodbye to $550 million. Think of what type of services we could have invested in with that additional funds. Perhaps not this year, but I'm still holding out for your vote.
Thank you,
Then at least
thank you, Councillor Wong-Tam. Time's up. Councillor Perruzza.
Thank you, Speaker. I too have a motion I'd like to move. Perhaps the clerks can put that on the screen, and it has to do with library hours, and it's self-evident. I'll speak to that in just a second. I just simply want to also extend my thanks and gratitude to both the mayor, the budget chief, and all of those other folks involved in this budget. And I can appreciate the task that the budget presents, especially given, that the footprint that the province of Ontario has in our big city government setup. They got a big footprint on the residential property tax. We talked about that this morning, 33%. They got a big footprint on the commercial industrial tax, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% of that. They got a big footprint in terms of all of the monies that, for our budget by way of transfer payments from the province, somewhere in the neighborhood of nearly $2 billion. Given that straitjacket, to cobble together a budget that A, grows the city, B, finds consensus not only in this council chamber, but with within the city at large, to grow the city and move it forward, I think is a feat in itself, and it should be applauded, and I think that they have done a terrific job in doing that. I want to just focus briefly on the motion that I moved before you in extending for a relatively small sum of money, adding some 5,538 hours to our library system and what that means. And I know that whatever I say on this subject will never ever do it the justice or the credit that the library and what the library system has represented to me. I grew up in the Jane Finch area, and as a young boy coming from a different country, not understanding the language, I was somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 years old. I discovered the library system. I discovered the library. It was a happenstance. How did I discover the library? Well, one day I figured out that in the library, at the Woodview Park Library, they had newspapers, Corriere, and they had other newspapers that came from abroad. And I could follow, the soccer league and the soccer teams in Italy that were playing, I could follow my Roma, I could follow Inter. And I started to habitually go to the Woodview Park Library and do that. And as a result of that, I discovered music, I discovered books, I discovered an oasis, a place where I could go to. And later, I migrated to the York Woods Library on Finch and Tobermory, a place where I could just go. I have to tell you, I got some of my best sleeps at the York Woods Library. I did. It was wonderful. Not only could I go there and explore and do all of the things that I love to do, but I also, from time to time, because I came from a crowded household where finding space was difficult, where I got to, from time to time, catch up on a little snooze. It was absolutely wonderful. That doesn't mean that when I was growing up that the local pool halls didn't call to me, because they did. I learned to play a great game of snooker. Foosball, I became, a regional champion. We don't want to know your life. But, exactly. But it was the library. That's the place where where, you know, whenever I said to anybody I'm going to the library, everybody respected me for that. Whether it was my family, whether it was my friends, whether it was the broader community. It was the place that had broad acceptance, that when I went there, I was going to be doing well. And I have to tell you, and it's because of that library system that I'm probably standing here before you semi-articulate today. And you know what? And I believe it's the place where other young people, just like me,
Thank you,
while the
Councilor
challenges
Carusa.
today.
Thank you, thank you. Councilor Matlow.
Madam Speaker, I have a motion. I'll speak to the motion in a moment. I first want to thank the Budget Committee from the bottom of my heart.
Please introduce your motion. You introduce your motion before you speak.
I do move the motion, and I'll speak to it in a moment. I just want to thank, first of all, the Budget Committee from the bottom of my heart for moving forward with your recommendations for the youth hubs. Any of us who have visited youth hubs in our city and have spoken to the kids who frequent them understand how they can change lives in ways that aren't always immediate, sometimes generational, but sometimes you hear stories that help you recognize that the work that we do here can be incredibly meaningful and contribute to safer communities and help our kids go on paths that each one of us would want for our own. So I just wanted to acknowledge you receiving this so well and acting on it. Visit one. You'll know what it means. On the topic of youth, I wanted to hone in on one particular issue that was brought to my attention by students from across our city. And it's to do with the fact that the fare increases that were decided by the TTC this year disproportionately were higher for youth post-secondary than any other category of fare. And what our students said to me, and I imagine they've said to some of you, is we are the ones who we don't have as much money as most other categories or demographics. We want to be able to get to class. We want you to help make it easier for us to get to class, not to raise fares disproportionate to others, certainly far higher than the rate of inflation that we boast about trying to achieve through property tax raises. And there's declining OSAP, rents are going through the roof. We all know these stories. We all know it's true, and we all know that our youth need our support. So what this motion does, and by the way, I also want to acknowledge Councillor Bradford's motion, which is the first time that I've actually seen a member of the TTC, and credit is due to Councillor Bradford, to recognizing formally that this is unfair, that it does need to be re-examined. And what my motion does is it creates a bridge to allowing us to subsidize that fare one time so that the fare system can be reviewed. I spoke with Rick Leary about this, and what is clear to me is that there's no fault to anyone at the TTCs, but the system is flawed, fundamentally flawed. First of all, I understood from Mr. Leary that Presto actually locks in the fare before this comes to council for final consideration, because we're going to make a request to the TTC today. And it takes about 8 weeks. This wonderful digital miracle of Presto takes 8 weeks to set the fare, which is bizarre to me. So what my motion does is it recognizes that fact, and it allows for, yes, the fare will go up for 2 months, but then it subsidized the remainder of the 8 months, the next 8 months. Moreover, what this does is it allows us to move forward with a review of our fare system and making sure that it is equitable and fair to all. This is a request to the TTC. I understand that they do have delegated authority to set the fares, but I think it's important, and I hope that you will support this today. The last thing I wanted to mention is that I think this budget is one of the better budgets that I've ever seen at council. I think it did strike a wonderful balance between the many priorities of councillors and our communities. And I can see that there was a lot of work done by both the the chair of the committee and the mayor's staff and the mayor to perhaps proactively consider what might be contentious, what might be difficult conversations, and really try to reflect those conversations in a budget that would come to council today. I think that's actually very good leadership. But I hope that you will consider what I'm proposing you today with the TTC is reflective of a concern that wasn't fully addressed. And if you speak to the student unions and students from the universities and colleges across the city, you will see that this really matters to them. They're struggling and they need our support. It's really, really expensive to be a youth and a student in our city today, and to disproportionately raise fares on them more than other categories that can better afford it
Thank
is
you,
wrong.
Councillor
Thank you.
Matlow. We do have a question for you, Councillor Holiday, 3 minutes, clarification.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wondered why the councillor chose the vehicle reserve accounts as the source of revenue or funding.
I'll give you a very candid answer, Councillor. Similar to what I said last year when I was supporting moving forward with the youth hubs. Unlike the mayor's staff, it is that I think have far better access to perhaps some sources of funds to be able to proactively offset costs of priorities that the mayor or committee chairs would like to drive. When you're a councillor who's not received at the table, perhaps, you have to be creative about where you try to offset. What I arrived at, what I concluded was that if I don't overly prescribe exactly which fleets I borrow from the reserves from, we would, but I leave it to the city manager to determine where, as a temporary bridge to next year, might there be really little to no effect. That's what I would like the city manager to consider. And remember, this is a request of the TTC, so obviously all of that would, and also I'm trying to, demonstrate that if we are having to sort of weigh between vehicle fleet services and a bridge subsidy for students who are struggling to pay their fares, that, if we are going to prioritize one or the other, making it very clear what side I believe that we need to move on for now. By the way, one last thing, I'm not a big fan of going into reserves, but I think in this case it's reasonable.
But we know from the work done at Audit Committee that the vehicle reserve account in particular is one that is underfunded, and one of the outcomes of underfunding the vehicle reserve and the vehicle replacement state of good repair is that it actually costs us more to run the vehicles. So of all the places to curtail, this actually costs more than $2.576 million to taxpayers. It's going to have a multiplier effect because of the source of it. So I wanted to glean why you chose that one. And the other thing you raised was the inequity of the fare increase. Why not just distribute it to other fare classes?
So, for example, there is a reserve account XQ 1015 Transportation Services. And there's one for municipal licensing and service and standards, vehicle for hire reserve. There's the zoo. There's Toronto Building. There's a whole bunch of different reserve accounts. And what I'm asking for is for the city manager, of course, not to do anything that would, unintentionally arrive at higher costs, but just in his wisdom, with his knowledge. That's why I don't feel comfortable prescribing it, to find where those savings are now. If that can't be, I would accept that too. And that's why this is in the form of a request. But if it is possible to do it, I think that if there is no harm done by borrowing from those reserves on a one-time basis, and again, in any other world, I wouldn't support that. But I think in this case, if you're going to weigh the priorities,
Councillor Matlow, thank you.
That's a reasonable.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, clarification of the motion, 3 minutes.
Yes, I would like to clarify. I'm wondering if staff clarified it for the mover. Your motion talks about doing this to reduce the fare increase and that this would start May 1st. You say you discussed this with Mr. Leary. Did TTC staff not explain to you that the reprogramming of the machines to accommodate increases starts March 1st? Yeah. The technological work is already underway.
He did. I spoke to that earlier in my comments. So, Mr. Leary it was actually very informative about the Presto system and how, I thought it would actually be far, this digital system, I thought it would be far more, fluid, but clearly it's not. So that's why I recognize that until then, the fare would go up. And the way that I did the cost breakdown, the aggregate, if you look at all the different categories, the aggregate fare increase, I believe, was $31.4 million. And then if you just parse out the amount that would be raised above and beyond for the youth would be, I believe, 3.4, if I'm remembering it correctly. And then what I did is that I brought it down to 2.576, recognizing that in the next couple of months the increase would have to go up because we couldn't, as quickly as I'd like, reset the Presto fare. So I took that into consideration.
So to be clear, you took that into consideration, and this is your math.
Yes.
But to be clear, this motion, while you discussed with staff, what they told you was the voluminous information such as that we are addressing the problem with the children's card. We are addressing the student pass, all of it over a different time frame, but it is already being addressed by the commission and by staff in a way other than your motion, and that would be a preferable path in staff's view.
Well, but that's subjective. I mean, you're saying, so it's preferable.
I think it's factual, actually. I don't know if it's subjective. I think it's facts.
But I'm referring, sorry, the end of your sentence was from staff's point of view. What I'm submitting, though, is that, well, yes, I acknowledge Councillor Bradford's motion. I think that, yes, that is the route to go. We should be going in that direction. It doesn't change the fact that for this coming year, right? Because the TTC hasn't gone through that exercise yet, that youth will experience a disproportionately high fare hike to any other category group. And on behalf of those students, we're in a representative democracy, and I'm bringing that voice to the table. Again, without any sort of, I know that the TTC, you and all the commissioners struggle every year. You run a system that disproportionately to any modern transit system isn't funded fairly or well enough. So I know that you struggle to figure out how to balance the budget there.
Okay, thank you. I think you've answered the question. Councillor Pasternak to speak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I have two motions. One is to Toronto Police Service regarding operating budget. The City Council requests the Toronto Police Services Board to allocate some of the extra officers approved under the 2020 operating budget for Toronto Police Service for traffic safety and enforcement. And secondly, Parks, Forestry and Recreation operating budget requests that the General Manager of Parks, Forestry and Recreation to consider as part of the 2021 budget process placing Downsview Recreation Centre on the Recreation Long-Term Capital Plan and work with the local councillor to leverage Section 37 funds allocated to this project for design work. So that money, that work is already funded. It's in escrow. It's in a Section 37 account. And the Downsview Community Centre was approved by council as part of the Downsview Secondary Plan 10 years ago. It's time to get on with it. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Budget Chief and Mayor Tory and his staff, and of course the Budget Committee for all the work that went into this budget. I sat on the Budget Committee for 4 years, and I can certainly say that there's a shocking amount of work that goes into it, but it's also a great education on how the city functions and where our monies go, and I want to just pay tribute to them, and I shouldn't leave out the city manager and of course the finance team that works with him. I think when we look at some of the priorities in the city and some of the issues that come through the committee that I chair, Infrastructure and Environment, I'm encouraged by what I see here. I think most people agree that traffic management, pedestrian safety and traffic safety is one of the top issues that comes across our desk all across the city. So I'm happy to see that the road safety plan has gone up from 19 million to 22 million. Automated enforcement has gone up from 6 million to 16 million. The school crossing guard program has gone from 14 million to 24 million. We're adding a Toronto Police Services enforcement pilot, and of course education is also funded. So you're looking at about a 61% increase as we go forward. At the same time, I think we have to look at some of the work, the funding of Toronto Water. Even though it's rate-based, I just wanted to mention in passing that many of our communities are still crying out for stormwater and sewer management upgrades to prevent business flooding, to protect homes, and to protect businesses. And I think in the budgets, the rate-based budgets that we passed, I think we would like to commend Toronto Water staff and, of course, the mayor for making sure that infrastructure upgrades are a priority. When it comes to Transform TO and, of course, the national initiative to have a plastics ban, I was going to move a motion here today for a Made in Toronto response to that, to make sure that we are at the table when it comes to decision-making, enforcement, and any kind of mitigating factors. When it comes to other infrastructure, such as paving, road resurfacing, pothole filling, clearly we're there in the funding areas to make sure that our roads are safe, that our roads are paved, and that we reduce the damage to vehicles, and of course, we also reduce pedestrian injuries. Cycling infrastructure, we have a new team at cycling. We adopt a cycling plan every few years. We fully fund it, yet many in our communities don't see the reality on the ground. And I think we're finally at a situation now where we'll be able to see the rollout of our various cycling safety measures and our cycling trails. Developing a budget of one of the largest governments in the country is no easy task. It's a balance of priorities, hundreds of priorities, to make sure that we service our diverse communities, make sure we service our marginalized communities, make sure people have a safe place to live, a dignified place to live. But at the same time, we also have to remember those who help build this country, our seniors. And under the Toronto Seniors Strategy, we have to make sure that they're protected, that they can age in place in their home. And that's why we're looking very much forward to the tax relief amendments and reforms that are coming to Executive Committee at the end of March. At the same time, I think this budget is reflective of the city that we are, where we're meeting requirements across the city, and we're doing the best we can to keep the taxes under control, make sure we fund all our programs, make sure the city is safe, healthy, and that's why it continues to be at the top of the list as livable cities across the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Almost exactly 5. Councillor Grimes is next.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have 3 motions I'd like to move. Put them on the screen if I could. There are a B, and a C, and these are to do with murals on bell boxes in the different areas of my ward. It's net zero, so I'd like to move those motions. And I'd like to start off by helping our arts community out in the west end of our city, which Gary Crawford, our budget chief, is a big supporter of the arts, and they're always looking for a piece of the pie. And I think under Gary's leadership, I think the arts, you've seen the funding for all our arts throughout the city go up, which is great. I'm going to tell everybody in this room, fastest growing city in the world, in North America, I'm sorry, unprecedented growth. And when you tell people we're the 4th largest city in North America, we passed Chicago, I think 3-4 years ago, they're kind of taken back by that. But the things that are happening in this city are just unprecedented. So, housing emergency, homeless emergency, environmental that we bring to these councils day in and day out that weren't expected, but they all come in here on top of moving the city. The densities we're putting into the city is unbelievable. We have to move these people. All councillors in this chamber are looking for their new bus route or, my connection to the waterfront, all that to happen. There's only so much funding to go around. Vision Zero is something that was brought forward by this council to Barbara Gray's division, which have reacted to these. Things are all piling on. We've talked about our wet weather flow, people flooding basement. The needs are great through the city, but there's got to be a balance. And the vehicle registration tax is coming here. I'm not going to be supporting that. The city building fund, my friend Councillor Layton calls them some fees, but they all add up. And when you're sitting at home trying to pay your taxes and you add them up, it's a lot. I can tell you, being a father of 5, I'm kind of terrified for them all to live in this city. I'm now a grandfather now. I don't know where they're going to be. But I can tell you that this council has reacted. I've been here a few years, and we've always reacted. We've always found a way to do it, and there has to be a balance. I want to thank Gary Crawford and his team in the Budget Committee. I don't think people have any idea
how much time. And I've been here a while, I don't know, but I know it's a daunting task that they go through, and it's day in, day out, they're there. So thank you. We have an awesome staff. I think we'll all agree here, supporting this cast here day in and day out. People do come and go, but they are trained by the best, and when they do leave, we're in good hands. That being said, I hear a lot around thanking our mayor today, John Tory, and I want to thank the mayor. The mayor, he's getting thanked by people here from all political stripes. He's out in their wards. I know he's been out to my ward on numerous occasions. I've had great chats where he's brought me into his office to say, listen, what do you think about this? But I think the mayor, you've brought a lot of things together. I think someone said, I forget who it was, but this council usually gets it right. And I got a lot of faith in this council and our staff, and I think as we move the city forward, we're in good hands. So with that, I should support my 3 motions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grimes. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. I have a motion. I move that in anticipation of the forthcoming report on the implementation of the Housing Commissioner model. Hey, Jim.
1 second, Councillor Perks. I'll stop your time. Councillor Karagianis, you maybe want to take a conversation elsewhere? We're having trouble hearing. Excellent. If you could do it a little more quietly, that would be great. I did.
Well, that was weird. Maybe I'll start again. That in anticipation of the forthcoming report on the implementation of the Housing Commissioner model, City and Council increased the 2020 operating budget for Housing Secretariat by 0.75 million gross and 0 net, funded by the Social Housing Stabilization Reserve Fund as initial funding for the model to ensure that the Housing Commissioner office can launch in 2020. Now, members, you will remember that the road to getting our housing plan in place was a rocky one. Many members of the community felt that we needed to do better. Many members of the community wanted us to act on housing through a human rights lens. And the agreement we came to with members of civil society, members of council from different points of view, was that we would launch the program, but we would do 2 things immediately. One was convening a table of the federal and provincial and municipal governments to devise an emergency plan to deal with homelessness in the City of Toronto. Now, I understand from the Planning and Growth Committee meeting just this week that table hasn't happened, and that, you know, we're hopeful that maybe something will drag the province to the table by June. So we've disappointed the community who are working on homelessness issues and housing issues in one way already. The other thing that they were absolutely clear that we needed to do was to implement the tools so that we would have a human rights framework for our housing program. And the piece of work that we as a city committed to do to deliver on that was to have an independent commissioner who would look on across the board basis, not a case-by-case individual basis, at whether there were structural things we were doing that violated people's right to housing. And that was the housing commissioner. And when we had the debate, we all agreed, and it was voted on by this council, that we would take the necessary steps to get that office established in 2020. You heard during my questioning of staff in the lead up to this item that budget line does not appear. And it's difficult. It's hard to know what budget line to put an office. We don't know what department it will be attached to. Maybe it'll be independent. We don't know those things. But what we do know is when we approve a new position in a budget, especially one that's very senior level and is going to require some kind of a hiring panel, it can take months and months and months. So if we don't put something in this year's budget, here's the risk we run. We come together for the 2021 budget, we figured out the model for the housing commissioner, we decide to do it, we put the money in the budget, and then we start the process of recruiting, because we can't recruit if we don't have money to pay somebody. Meaning that it will be a full 19 months between when we adopt the plan and tell Torontonians we want a human rights lens for housing and when we actually put somebody in a role to make sure that we're going down that path. What my motion does, and you heard city staff say that the money's available and that they thought we could use it for this purpose, both at Budget Committee and here today at Council, is said, out of our social housing reserve, let's put a little earmark on $750,000, which will enable us to launch that office in this year. Is that the exact amount of money? No, it is not. Is that going to affect the ongoing housing stabilization reserve? Staff tell us no. We're within our rights to do it. We can manage that. So, it's a very simple proposal. It's delivering simply on the commitment that this council made to Torontonians that we would adopt a rights-based approach to housing. Some others don't want to put the money in, but again, you don't put the money in, the risk you run is that you have to do it in the next budget, and then it's 6 to 7 months after that before the office is in place. As a final note, I do want to thank Councillor Perruzza. It had been my intention as a member of the Library Board, and Councillor Ainsley and I have talked about this, to push for Council to finally start to implement the open hours program. Thank you to Councillor Perruzza for bringing that motion, and I encourage you all to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Speaker. I just have two motions. And this is, first one is just leading on my questions to our great Deputy Chief that I asked earlier, which was about the loss of revenue, substantial loss, I would think, when we look year over year at the traffic ticket situation. And with this information, I think it's also quite important that we would see what's happening by division. We all get a lot of requests to have speeders stopped, to have different things happen, and we should just
Do you have another
Yes.
motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. First one. Second one. Thank you, Speaker. You're so good. You're right on top of that. The second one actually is about the Housing Secretariat that the Exec Director, our new great Executive Director, and our great General Manager of Shelter Support and Housing include in the June 11th, 2020 report to Planning and Housing on the implementation plan for Housing TO, appropriate city action, identification of any new resources or budget adjustments that may be required in 2021 to deal with renovictions, and that would be particularly N12s and N13s. So I'll now speak to that, starting because I just read that one. And there's an upsurge and a big upsurge in N12s, which is telling somebody you're going to be moving into that place, and so you have the right to ask them to leave where they've been renting for perhaps most of their adult life. And whether or not you move in, nobody's tracking. So many people are being evicted, we'll say very unfairly. And then there's N13s, which is also spiked, which is buying a building, letting the tenants know you're going to be renovating to the point where they can't stay there any longer. And then lo and behold, they're all gone. And then you re-rent that for 2 and 3 times the amount. So this is a relatively new phenomenon everywhere. And we have a protection of rental housing subcommittee that Councillor Perks and Councillor Bradford are on. We will have some recommendations, but I just want to make sure we're teed up for next year, because coordination of what the city can bring to bear for a hearing is rather important. And being able to assist the tenants, whether it's through any assistance through legal aid or legal or coordination with buildings or advice, etc., even something written. We don't know what that is, but I don't want us to be next year wondering what to do, and that we actually have a plan for that when we report out. And the second is what I started to speak about until you reminded me I had a second motion, Speaker, and that has to do with the revenues, essentially, that I will consider to be lost revenues over, looks like probably 9 years, fairly substantial revenues when we're looking, when you say 1 year was 29 million, another year was a lot more. When we add that all up, that's a substantial chunk of foregone revenue. And I think Torontonians actually didn't know that we were not having traffic enforcement in the same way, and that the city didn't know that these revenues were diminishing. And I just want to speak about the importance of traffic enforcement. We all get a lot of requests. We get requests for speed humps. We get requests for stop signs. We get requests to slow traffic down in many different ways on residential streets and on arterials. We want crosswalks. We want automatic enforcement. We're doing an awful lot. And not to have people that are speeding feel that they aren't going to get caught by any means is a problem. Or turning on a street that says don't turn because they're school children, whatever the reasons are, having this lack of enforcement at the same time as we're wishing to increase safety does seem to me to be a bit of an anomaly. And so I think when we're looking next year at all of the budgets, including transportation services, Vision Zero, Toronto Police Operating, we really have to have all the facts in front of us. And this is just to bring all those facts in front of the Budget Committee. And in my last few seconds, I'll just thank the Budget Chief, thank the Mayor, and I want to thank all the members of the Budget Committee. It's a long slog. Thank you so much for all the time you give to bring us here today.
Thank you. We do have a question for you. Councillor Holliday,
Thank you, Madam
clarification
Speaker.
of the
May I
motion.
request that the second motion be put up?
The one about shopping?
What about, the one about housing? Thank you. I just wanted to understand, because it only flashed up there. So we're in the context of a budget discussion here.
Yes, it should say 20, yes, yep.
What's the purpose of this? Is the vision to have some sort of a funding or a program mechanism which supports tenants? Or are we talking about, and I think I gleaned from your speech a little bit, that the city's going to become involved in the process? And I think you talked about having some supports or legal aid. Are we getting involved in the tribunal process? What's
we're
the
not.
point of this?
No, sorry, we're not really getting involved in the legal process, but once we identify, let me just say, I don't think there's a lawyer on staff who understands anything about renovictions that could give advice to this staff. I'm not asking to hire new lawyers. I'm just saying perhaps there needs to be some specializing. There is not a coordinating position for all the various things that would happen regarding buildings department, regarding our tenant services, many different things, including EPIC. So EPIC right now really is after you've been evicted. This is eviction prevention, councillor. So I don't know what that might be. I'm not putting a number. I'm not saying do it. I'm just saying we have a great committee. We're working hard. Is there anything we identify that would need to be added in any way in 2021? That's all.
Is the point of this, though, to take a side? Because I realize that, there's a tribunal process between landlords and tenants, right? Two sides to the equation on one of these discussions. Is this motion advocating for us to take the side of tenants automatically in some sort of a support process? I got to understand what we're getting into here.
We're supporting tenants once they've been evicted. We're supporting tenants that they know their rights.
I got that.
May I finish?
Yeah.
Thank you. Many tenants that are rent-evicted actually don't understand that they can move back. They have the right to move back in. We have so many opportunities in which we speak to people, speak to tenants, housing activists. Getting information is important. Coordinating information is important. And yes, if you have to move somebody out to do substantial renovations, they do have that right to move back in. However, very few of them are represented at the landlord and tenant. I'm not asking our staff to do that, councillor.
But this is before they leave.
This
You're
is before.
advocating, not after.
Well,
the
this,
support.
before you leave, you have the right to stay. And if you don't know you have the right to stay, you're just going to leave and then find out later you had the right to stay, which is really and truly what happens to a lot of people. So we are in the business of building so much housing right now. We want to build so many units. We are committed to that. But we can't build as fast as people are leaving, being evicted here, evicted there, rent-evicted. we need to be judicious and careful in how people are being asked to leave their long-term housing.
And renovictions are legal or illegal?
Well, the landlord and tenant board will make that decision if they're allowing them to take the unit. But tenants are in an unfair relationship, is rather unbalanced, and if they don't know their rights and they don't have assistance, they don't know where to go, it's not in the FMT hotline, and it's not coordinated, perhaps it's not a really big renovation, councillor. Perhaps you could stay in your home.
Thank you.
Therefore, there's many different things that need to be brought to the table. Happy to educate.
Thank you. Councillor Lai.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to join my colleague staff to first, start off by thanking everybody who's involved in this lengthy budget process, and I know everybody have put a lot of tireless efforts into it, especially the budget chief and also the city staff that have found millions of dollars of efficiencies, and I know that is, and I think most importantly, I'd like to thank the Toronto residents who came out to do deputations, who come out to town hall meetings to be part of this budget process. And it's a difficult decision to raise property tax, and as the mayor said, it's a balancing act. And I know that we have a budget here that we've done a lot of different balancing here, and I just wanted to highlight a few points that why I'm supporting this budget. And I hear from residents every day that we need to provide more services to tackle different difficult issues in the city. And I'm happy to see that the increased funding for the neighborhood officer program. And hopefully we can provide neighborhood officer to the wards and to the community that don't have a dedicated one. And each ward should have a community office, neighborhood officer to engage with police and to engage with our community so that this will provide benefits well beyond the cost to the city. And with the increase in the vehicular pedestrian accidents, the additional enforcement team will be a positive start to enforcing traffic violations, as will the mobile speeding enforcement cameras. We need to continue to keep our own streets safe and explore proactive measures to do so. And with the additional TTC bus services, I look forward to the express bus services on Finch Avenue because in some parts of Toronto, it's difficult to get to transit. And I really look forward to the Finch East bus, that we can add some more express services to there, because I've been hearing residents saying that they are waiting for 4 or 5 buses before they can actually get on the bus. And it's also important to note that we are taking our state of good repair seriously and starting to focus on the work that need to be done. And I noted in one of the budget documents that Toronto is under a lot of regional pressure, as there were 77,000 new residents over the last year, and also 35% of the total traffic on the Gardiner and DVP is generated by non-residents. 13% of all the trips on the TTC either start or end outside of Toronto. I just wanted to do a shout out to the provincial and to the federal government that the economic engine of Canada, Toronto, need to be better funded with all these capital funding to make sure that they are all in good state of repair. And also, I would like to support this budget because that we have actually a mechanism that is serving the most vulnerable people, a lot of seniors that cannot afford to pay the increase. And I'm happy to say that we have programs to serve those people. But I just wanted to see that maybe in our next year, perhaps we can actually open up a little bit in helping some of these people, for those people who cannot afford to pay their taxes. So having said all that, I'm glad to support this year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm only going to speak for a minute because I have a video piece that I'd like to show. I've heard many councillors express surprise that people accepted the city building fund levy so quickly. There were a couple of days of controversy over it, and then there was a general community-wide acceptance. And I don't know that that means that the modernization of the budget, that the transparency we're trying to build in has actually achieved its goal. I think people just know when they're standing in the darkness of a sweaty, stalled Line 2 subway car on a Monday morning that we need to invest. They just know. But I don't know that they deeply understand yet why this city building levy fund is going to serve certain purposes. They're going to see that envelope growing over the next 3 years, not by a windfall, but by a gradual amount. And during that time, we won't be introducing, in my crystal ball, we won't be introducing a lot of new revenue tools because they'll be absorbing that change. But how do we make sure they deeply understand that so that they're ready to make the next investment? Madam Speaker, there is a vehicle, we've used it before, that gives a deep understanding to communities such that globally, around the world, using this process, citizens actually come forward and invest up to 33% more in their municipalities because they deeply understand it. I'll show you what I mean in the following video. Thank you.
This is Political Blind Date. For Shelley's last stop, she wants Gary to learn about participatory budgeting.
This is our first stop. You can check out our little signs.
These weren't here.
These
I've
weren't
been here before. These were not here.
Yeah,
Prospect Park Alliance, little barbecues, community barbecues.
Funded
so this
through
would have been funded
participatory
through-
budgeting. This was a recent winner, but what's interesting to me about these is that these are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they're our first grills in the park that are accessible.
Of course. You could pull in under them. So the neighborhood assembly maybe starts with the idea of we wish it was easier to cook in the park. And that's where Parks comes in. If they may have seen these in a catalog, they know they can get these. If someone says they want to have that, you want to have Parks there first because they can talk about what's viable.
They're involved in the
part
decision
in the
of how it's
decision
gonna
about whether something goes on the ballot and whether it's viable. You set these conditions up front. And then if people know about those things while they're voting on it, then you don't have any dispute afterwards. It's become quite sophisticated for these guys because they have done it every year for 8 years. And there's learning every year. When you do PB every year, what happens is residents start to think like councillors. They start to set priorities.
I worked with a process that focused on anti-poverty work in Rochester, New York. Some of the projects were amazing.
And sometimes you want to do those things, but you end up in a bit of a debate, particularly in parks, with the public service because it all seems politically charged. I need to put this nice thing in the park, it'll get me votes. But when you hand it over to the community, what your staff learn, what the public service learns is, no, parks really do mean everything to residents and they want this. They're telling you they want this. So now let's just figure out a way to get it done, gentlemen.
I want people engaged, I want them involved. And that's where I look at, again, let's have PB, let's have participatory budgeting at a certain level.
Research just came out, your timing is amazing, by 2 professors on the impact of participation, like PB, on tax revenue. So I felt like that connects directly.
Bam!
I know.
That's exactly what we want to hear.
You want to guess what they found?
Yeah, do I?
Do you want to guess what they found? They studied the many, many years of participation in Brazil. Any guess on how that impacted tax revenue?
Well, I'm assuming you're going to say it went up?
It went up. Any guess on how much?
Oh, I couldn't even begin to guess.
5%, 2%.
You go with 2?
I'll go with 2.
What's your guess, Shelley?
Okay, then I'll say 12 so they can be far apart from him.
Phew, 33%. I know. I
Carrie, 33%.
So how did it go up?
They found that people were more likely to pay the taxes they actually owed and to be transparent in reporting how much they had made and things like that, which is where we know that government doesn't always collect all of its tax revenue. These processes, because it's this radical transparency of what they say is not just a vote, but also a voice.
How long is the video?
Helps people trust and know where the money is being spent and feeling more confident. It's
just about over.
What they actually owe.
This is Political Blind Date.
Here you go, Counselor. It's over.
I don't mean to interrupt your blind date, but. Councillor Holiday?
It's a tough act to follow.
Councillor
Madam
Holiday
Speaker.
wants
Thank
to
you.
go on a blind date as well.
I did. Thank you.
We're on a blind date.
I just want to start by saying thank you to the budget chief, to the mayor, the budget committee. I don't always agree with the politics of this process, but you know what? Credit is due where hard work was done. So congratulations, 239 recommendations plus the little tinkering on the floor. It's no small feat to bring a budget before council. I don't agree with all 239 of those recommendations. I wanted to point out a couple of them that I think we should be paying attention to as council. And in fact, they're non-financial. Item number 142, and I raised it in my questions, it just talks about some policies around how we split the payment for transit between the fare box and probably the property tax base. I guess there's no secret answer to where we would get the other half to the 50%. But I think council should be very conscious in these type of decisions, and it's buried in the middle of a report, and sometimes it goes unnoticed, but it has big meaning to it. I also wanted to draw attention to item number 4, and it just talks about childcare. Now, it talks about a little bit about the funding split of us paying 20% towards the childcare subsidies. And in this budget, there's a bunch of money baked in for that, and I understand that. And I don't ever advocate on reneging on that money. We went through that as a council. There was a change in the financial circumstances, and it caused a lot of grief for us. So I'm very cautious about this because it has to do with what I said earlier today about being very deliberate in the things that we involved ourselves in. I do take exception to us getting into the business of childcare subsidies. And the reason for that is not because I'm against them. I had 3 kids go through childcare, and the one's just sort of finishing his time because he's getting older. And I realize it's expensive and it's prohibitive. Councillor Cressy asked some great questions. How many people are on childcare subsidies? There's 30,000 in the city, and if I remember from the report, that's out of 80,000 childcare spots. That's a high ratio. But I do get worried when we become the production source for the money to fund that type of a subsidy program. And it's not like running a shelter, and it's not like running public health, because Councillor Cressy asked about that as well. That was a service that you might argue has been downloaded onto the city, but it's a service. Whereas this is a subsidy program that perhaps is better matched to an income source, because that's what it's all about. It's about income differences rather than the property taxpayer. But what I get really worried about is getting into the business of childcare and these co-subsidy agreements when these other orders of government ought to be paying that program because that's where it belongs. If it's true what we heard from staff is that 1,160 spots may be at risk. I don't know how we're going to come up with the $15 million to pay for those. I'm not sure that we should. And the reason for that is it's, again, not because I don't think that they should exist. Parents out there need help. But if we don't hold the provincial and federal governments accountable for the services that they own up to, then we become the responsible entity. And so if folks want to go out and protest about the removal of childcare subsidy spaces, great, go up to Queen's Park. Don't protest the city council. It's the job of Queen's Park to be funding these sorts of things. And if they make the decision to reduce the funding, then they need to own up to it. I'm not sure that it's the right answer to fight the political fight by putting it onto the shoulders of taxpayers. Councillor Bradford talked about it a little bit in his speech. It was about ambition, aspiration. It's not our journey alone. I agree with that. But he turned around and said, this budget contemplates heavy lifting. I agree, but I'm not going to pat myself on the back for the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting is done by all the taxpayers in the city. And they're the ones that we have to face and own up to. And it is heavy lifting on these programs, especially when it comes to transfers of wealth or income. It's not what the property tax system is designed for. And I just would ask the councillors keep that in mind as they go through these budget decisions. I understand the politics of it, but please appreciate the mechanisms before us and the demands that the public place on us for the services that they need and expect in the city, and the services that are provided by those other orders of government. Let's hold them accountable, not make up for anything that they fail to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy to speak.
Well, thank you, Speaker. This is the 6th budget I've been a part of, and it is far and away the least contentious. And I think that's a good sign in and of itself. And I'd like to, in beginning my remarks, acknowledge 4 groups of people with some thanks to getting this to what I believe is a good budget. The first is the budget chief and his committee for the hard work and the tone that they have set in how we approach this budget. That in and of itself is a big deal. Our city staff, of course, from at the city manager and DCM level and our CFO, and it's her first budget, but to all our division heads for the long and arduous work that they put in. To our mayor, I think part of the reason this has been such a collaborative budget process is because a big decision was made around investing through the city building fund, and I'd like to commend his leadership on that. And then I think the last group we need to acknowledge here is this chamber and many residents of our city, because as recently as April, the 2020 budget was going to be an extremely tough one. As recently as April, we were facing hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts to our budget. We're not today. We're facing a $7.1 million cut to childcare subsidies and public health that we're absorbing, but a manageable cut because of the work of this chamber and residents in our city and organizations who spoke out and helped to secure a reversal of those cuts. If not for that, this would be a very different meeting. And I think that's a message that when you stand up for Toronto, when we collectively stand up for Toronto, we can win, and we did. There have been some epic budget battles over the years I've been a part of, and this is not one of them. Is this budget perfect? It's not for me, and I'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who says it's perfect for them. But it is a good budget, and it will have my support. And so let me articulate a few of the reasons why I think it is a good budget. We stood up collectively on public health, $4.3 million in cuts by the province. We have stood up for our residents and Torontonians when the province let them down on public health programs. Childcare subsidies for 186 subsidies. When the province decided to cut those, we again, as this city, have stood up to stand up for those families and those subsidies. The $6.1 million to combat the roots of violence and youth violence that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor Thompson announced. $160 million in capital funding for Toronto community housing this year and every year going forward for 10 years. When I had the privilege of sitting on the board of TCHC for many years, we were collectively fighting for each level of government to step up. We have. And that a big credit goes to our Deputy Mayor, Anna Bailau, for that work. And the City Building Fund, billions of dollars to get into the business of state of good repair in a much bigger way and to deal with housing. Now, this budget isn't perfect, and I wouldn't be doing my job as a councillor if I didn't acknowledge some of the omissions that I see. And forgive me, Mr. Mayor, I know it pains you when I acknowledge omissions, but we still spend far too much money on an aging piece of elevated infrastructure that I wish we weren't. The much-needed vacant homes tax and a luxury homes rate for the MLDT has been punted to next year, so we will have that great debate soon to come. And of course, waiting lists still continue to grow as we stood up as a city as it relates to childcare to keep them stable where they are. But that old line of show me your budget and I'll tell you what your priorities are. If there's a message in this budget, it's that when you invest, we can do good things. And I believe that we are investing, and I think we're going to build a better city as a result of it. And so, for me, this is a case of don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a good budget, and I want to commend everybody for their involvement in it, and I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy. Speaker Nunziata is next.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Councillor Crawford is the chair of the Budget Committee, and all the Budget Committee members for the past few months when we sat on the budget and having the deputations. Special thanks to the mayor. In this budget, we have increased funding for transit, housing, and the additional $6 million that we announced a couple of weeks ago for community safety. That's very important, and it was very important to my community in particular. The youth hubs, additional youth hubs in the city, and also the community spaces. We do have a lot of youth groups in my ward where we have agencies that are providing services and programming for youth, and I'm pleased to say that we will be funding some of these agencies to expand the services they are to the youth. It's very important to me. And as well as the funding for the police, for additional police officers, which is a priority for me in my ward. That is because of the number of gun violence that we've had in my ward. My constituents have been advocating for that for quite a while, and as well as getting neighborhood officers on the streets. What the community wants to see is more officers walking the street. They feel a lot safer, and I believe that the budget we have here today that we're approving addresses those issues. So there are a few motions that I will not be supporting that's been presented. The vehicle tax, it keeps coming up every year. I remember when it was first implemented, when David Miller was the mayor, we were told that that revenue was allocated for roads. It was not. I have no idea where that revenue went to, but it wasn't allocated. And also, what we have to remember, the people that want to increase that vehicle tax have to remember that the debate that we had was that we have a lot of seniors that live, that have a car, which they only use maybe once a week to go shopping, to go to the doctor's office, and we're asking them to pay that additional fee, as well as the car insurance. So we have to think of, when you bring forward these motions, that you look at the whole picture, and not just that you're going to tax these cars, but you have to think about the seniors and people out there that need their vehicle just to go to the doctor, and and you want to put an additional tax on the vehicle. Like, you have to think about that. If we want revenue, then we should be looking at, and I know that I brought it up a couple of years ago, and I hope that we can pursue that. Like, why not have a City of Toronto lottery? Why not have a lottery? Use that revenue to go to daycare parks. Why not? People are buying these lottery tickets every week. If you have to buy a lottery ticket, if you know it's going to the City of Toronto, if you know it's going to daycare and parks, you would go out and spend your dollar rather than Lotto Max or these other tickets. Why not do that? If you want to get revenue, that's the easiest way to get revenue, because it doesn't target everyone. It targets people that are buying these tickets weekly and are spending all this money. My opinion, if that's what you want to do, that's the way we should go. Thank you.
1 second. Councillor Fletcher, you had a point of order?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to clarify that when the vehicle registration tax was brought in, it was not dedicated to any roads, and many people believe that was the fault of the vehicle registration.
I don't
Thank
know
you
that
very
that's a point of order so much as a point of rebuttal, so I
think
don't
that-
have a
I think,
ruling. But thank
information's
you,
important.
thank you.
Thank you.
We don't actually have in the procedural binder points of information.
A point of something.
It's just a point, Speaker.
Councillor Layton, do you have actual points? You have the floor.
I have several points. I'd like to start with point number A, that economic development and culture, capital and operating budget. City Council requests the General Manager, Economic Development and Culture, in consultation with the Manager, Indigenous Affairs Office, City Council of Toronto, Council Fire, to report back to City Council no later than April 2020 with a plan to facilitate completion of the Indian Residential School Survivors Legacy Structure in Nathan Phillips Square. There are some conditions up there as well as part of that discussion. Motion B, and this is a longer one. This is a report request in relation to the implementation of a commercial parking levy.
as a dedicated revenue stream for transit, climate initiatives, and investments in resilience. You can see below there are a bunch of qualifications for what should be included in such a report request. And then motion C, which I probably don't need on the screen, but I will anyhow, which is being received as a friendly amendment to Councillor Matlow's motion, replacing the Fleet Services Vehicle Reserve accounts with the Tax Stabilization Reserve. First, I'd like to thank staff, city staff, for undertaking this budget process with us. I know it was a new process on all staff involved. I think it was a bit of a shift. To the budget chief and budget committee, we sat through a lot of deputations, a lot of questions, perhaps less because Councillor Davis is non-council, but we'll miss her dearly. Hi, Councillor Davis. Thanks to, because she is watching, trust me, I know. I'm not changing the mayor's childcare motion. Please, Janet, stop. The mayor, Mr. Mayor, and his staff, who I think demonstrated two things in this budget process to me personally. One is a collaborative approach, and two, an open-minded approach, where I felt open to bring stuff forward, and at the same time, there was an effort there to try to make things work. And I think it's evident in some of the motions that you see today and that you will see from others on council. And finally, I'd like to thank really those that were involved in making a lot of the changes in this budget and pushing us to change, and that's the public. To those that came out to make deputations, to the Toronto Environmental Alliance, the Youth Cabinet, TTC Riders, to Social Planning Toronto, Climate Fast. Activism works. And when you step up and when you share your voice with those around you and with those in positions of power, change can happen. And I think a lot of the change that we saw in this budget and that we'll see today are a result of their efforts. Sure, there were bumps along the way in this new budget process. I'm not saying that this was all a very merry process where we were all holding hands at every stage. But is this a perfect budget, as my colleague, Councillor Cressy said? No, it's not. We're relying on unconfirmed money from the federal government to address a hole in the budget, largely of the creation of global circumstances. We are balancing the budget, the TTC budget, on TTC fares. I don't think that's a good idea. I personally don't think charging more for transit is a good way to balance the budget. Do I want investments in transit that this budget is also making as a result of some of the work? Yes. I think it is the positive investment that we're making there, and I'm prepared to vote in support of the budget for that reason, because we're advancing priorities. Perfect, no, but priorities are moving forward, ones we've all agreed on. Ravine strategies moving forward in advance of when we thought it would. We're hiring new EMS workers. Our library hours are now being put forward here. Youth hubs. Our climate programs moving and advancing the way that it should be. Eviction prevention is, I hope, going to be put forward. Climate action. The Regent Social Development Plan. These are things that, for the most part, weren't in the budget at the beginning and found their way in the budget because they were commitments the council made together. Yes, the budget advances things, but there is still more we can do. Transit needs greater investment. We see that in the state of good repair, the purchasing of vehicles, and other lines need additional money. Road safety needs to happen faster and more effectively. We need to invest in that. Better parks, more affordable housing, more investments in climate action and resilience, better investments into our small businesses. These are things I believe we all agree on. So we have to find ways to pay for it. I'm going to tell you how. Some is going to come from efficiencies like we do every year. Hundreds of millions we find that way, but we need other tools. A sales tax has been mentioned repeatedly, but a parking levy is a tool we have. It's supported by a majority of Torontonians. It raises stable and sustainable money up to $500 million a year.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Councillor Bailao.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have 3 motions that I would like to put forward, and first one, should I just start speaking on the motion? Okay, so the first one is with regards to the EPIC program. As some of my colleagues during the question period ask, this is a program that has shown success, that we can expand, and that we know it's actually the most human and economic way to deal with this issue. We know that it is cheaper to keep people housed. We know that is the best way to address the issue, and so we would like to increase it by a bit over $1 million to make sure that staff have the capacity to continue to keep people housed. My second motion is, which one is it going to be? Okay, this is with regards with the much talked about vacant tax. And the reason why I'm actually amending some of the motion that Councillor Bradford, who has worked closely with me on this, is I wanted to make sure that people understood that this is not so much about the tax. This is actually a housing policy conversation that we need to involve our housing secretariat, the executive director in this. This is a policy that needs to be creating with a housing lens on it. The tax, it's the tool that we're gonna have. To be honest with you, the success of this policy, the success of this measurement is that we don't collect a penny. What we actually do is, to the measurements to the last report that we had in front of us, where it actually showed that we had between 15 to 28,000 empty units in the city of Toronto, is that we are able to bring some of that online and that we bring it into the market. The impacts that this has in the market, the impacts that this has on housing.
Do you have another motion?
I do.
Okay,
Can
you
I
need
speak
to
about this motion first?
Yeah,
Can I finish?
no, you have to bring them all forward and then talk.
Okay, okay. Bring the other one and I'll continue to, you can show it. I'll continue to speak on this one. So the idea of having the housing secretariat, having it in April, and ensure that it is also included in our implementation housing plan, is that we understand that this is a housing policy approach, that that we need to bring these housing units that today seat vacant, that we bring it online as stock in the housing stock. Keep in mind that this is as much as the entire production of housing that we do in a year. With all our industry, all the construction industry that we have, all the cranes that we have up in the air, the amount of units that we have vacant today in the city of Toronto is the entire production of one full year. So if we can bring some of those units available to be somebody's home, we should do it as soon as possible, and we should do it with all the tools that we have made available to us, and this might be very well be one of the tools that has been proven in other cities that has worked. It has worked in other cities. It has been implemented in other cities. So I am looking forward to have staff coming forward and have this included as well as part of our implementation plan for housing 2020-2030. When it comes in June as well, this should be included in how we implement our housing plan. My third motion as well is with regards to the housing commissioner. We have, as part of the housing plan, did commit to look into to have the housing commissioner function or position, or how it's going to work is going to be reported in June coming forward. The deputy city manager did acknowledge that this is going to come back and it's going to identify a reserve account from this year, and then is going to be embedded in the base budget for next year. There will be no need to wait. There will be adjustment in-budget adjustment, like it's done in many, many occasions, in many, many reports that we received throughout the year. So all I'm asking is, allow our staff to do the work. We have committed, council has voted to have it done. Council has voted to have it come forward. Allow our staff to do the report and come forward. I would like to, I know I'm reaching my 5 minutes, but I would like to thank staff and the budget committee and the mayor for what I think is a very balanced budget. I kept hearing, I think I'm one of the last few councillors to speak, and the word that I heard the most in this council chamber today, it was balanced, balanced, balanced. And I think that when we have, very pressing issues pulling us from all sides, the city is growing at an unprecedented pace, that we need to make sure that we invest in the areas that we need it. And sometimes we need to make tough choices, and I think this budget did it, and did it in a balanced way.
Thank you. We have questions. Councillor Holiday, clarification.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question's on the first motion. It's on the EPIC fund. I was curious about the source of the funding for it, not on the program. And I wondered if the Deputy Mayor bylaw would consider it a friendly amendment if I found another source worth $1.1 million that has zero effect on service levels and on reserve funds. Would you consider it a friendly amendment?
I don't know what it is, so I
Sure.
can't respond to an hypothetical
So there's a budget
question.
briefing note. In the clerk's budget, there's $1.1 million for consultation on ranked ballots. And there's nothing that compels us to do that. It's literally sitting in there. It's $1.1 million.
Councillor, I've
If we allocated that funding, it would harm nobody, and it would cost no one anything other than moving it from one cause to another. And I think that's the essence of what we do in this process.
As you would probably say, it is wise that we follow staff's advice, and because we worked with staff on this budget, on this motion, I will follow staff's advice and continue to use the source of funding available and presented to you.
And is it because of staff's advice, or is it because you want to spend the money on the other thing?
No, it is actually staff's advice, and as also you believe, we need to be fiscally prudent in here,
Right.
and I understand that it's much cheaper to keep people housed than to actually take them into homeless, so
good
this
point.
is actually the most economical and human way to actually deal with this issue.
And I would agree with sending the money that way to the EPIC program, but there's a spot right that we can get the money and it won't harm anybody in the city, won't reduce the service level anywhere.
I don't think staff would give me a source of funding that would harm anybody.
I realize Capital from Current has implications somewhere, and we've got that money sitting in the clerk's budget. There's nothing that compels us to move forward on ranked ballots, other than just a simple decision by council, and you wouldn't see that as friendly, or taking that money and using it from one source to another. That is, a higher and best use of the money.
Councillor, I believe those are two different issues. I presented you the source of funding, and I clarified to you that I am not willing to consider that a friendly amendment.
All
I
right.
think that answers your question.
$1.1 million it is. Thank you.
Councillor Matlow, question, clarification?
May I ask the clerks to put Councillor Bailow's motion regarding the housing commissioner in front of us? I just don't have the paper copy. Yeah, thank you. So may I ask, through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, what would be the primary difference with respect to purview between the housing commissioner and the executive director of the housing secretariat?
So what this council committed to have a rights to housing approach, and by working with experts in the field, and following what the federal government is doing also to implement the right to housing, it is advisable that we have either a housing commissioner or a function, somebody that has a complementary support work and that assists us in reporting on the implementation of our housing plan. Staff are looking into what is the best way to do that. I don't have the answer for you, Councillor. That's what the report will tell us, and that's what I'm asking is, in that report, identify the resources that you need and the funding sources.
This was the source of my confusion. I was reading up earlier about the mandate of the Housing Secretariat, and one of the items is delivering federal and provincial affordable housing programs and city programs by working with the private, on and on and on, et cetera. So I inferred that by how we've described their job description, that would be the applicable place. So
it's a bit different. This is new. We're the first city to do that. Canada is one of the very first countries to do that. They're putting the Housing Advocate Office together as well. So this is all, we're all working with stakeholders and through this, and that's why I think staff needs to have the time to do that report, and then let us know what resources they need. And once we actually understand what would that position entail, how it would differentiate from the housing secretary, then you start allocating the funds and you start saying, okay, this is how it's going to cost us, and we make that decision.
My last question, just to be clear, so is there, and I don't know, but is there a possibility that staff may determine hypothetically The concept has merit to investigate, but we've just determined that the Housing Secretariat's executive director is already fulfilling that mandate. We don't need to move forward with this, or is this sort of saying we've already determined that?
I don't want to predetermine that. With council gave a pretty strong indication direction that we wanted to move into that direction, that we feel like in order to have a right to house approach, that it is important to have somebody doing that overlooking and that accountability of our plan. So I would be very much looking forward to see what the conversations with the sector is going to bring forward, the opinion of our new housing secretariat, the city manager. Everybody's going to be working on this legal, because there's a big legal component to this as well. And how this is going to interact with the new federal role and office that is being created.
Thank you. Councillor Cole to speak.
Yes, while I was sitting here, I was reminded of an old colleague of yours, Madam Chair, City Councillor Ben Nobleman, and he used to say at budget time every year, we have a beer wallet and champagne tastes. And what he meant to say there, that we want all these things for our city, and it's all obviously good things we want, but then we have to look at the revenues at our disposal. And so the wants are unlimited and most of them are justifiable, and it's hard to argue with a lot of them, but that is the challenge we face, because in essence, we're a city, but we really are a province in that we are bigger than all provinces except for 3. I think we have bigger budgets than most of them, all the Maritimes combined. So we have so many things that we are doing, responsible for, and required to do because of the growing demands in our city. As I guess 60, 70,000 new people come into Toronto every year, and people sort of think magically we're going to house these people, we're going to make sure they're in our schools, make sure they're in our recreation centers. So somehow the good people who work for the city are able to absorb and welcome these 70,000 newcomers every year. And that's basically the size of cities like, I don't know, Belleville, whatever it is, every year. We're a New Burlington, perhaps. So that's done every year. And that's why I want to thank staff in all departments for doing their good work to ensure that all these people that come to Toronto are welcome, and the people that are already here are also getting the services they require. And that is a heck of a hard, difficult, complex job. And then planning for that year ahead, the work that goes into that every year, and that's why so many of you thanked Councillor Crawford and his dedication to this budget process, which goes on all year, and then the mayor and his staff and all the councillors who've had great involvement in the budget process. That is an incredible amount of work that's gone into this budget plan for next year. The thing that I just think of when we think of all these processes is that, as far as I'm concerned, I am sort of planning my initiatives that should be in the budget or are part of our spending or part of our investment on a daily basis. When these budget ideas, I know they all come at budget committees and the town halls on budgets, but to me, every time I walk into my local grocery store, Lady York there on Dufferin, people approach me on a regular basis. And they tell me what's important to them. On a regular basis, they tell me what they think, what is good, bad, or indifferent. If I walk into my little corner store, if I go to the mechanic, if I go to church or a synagogue, people come up to you all the time and they say, I want this. This is important. This is not important. So to me, that is part of a budget process that goes on 365 days a year. When we have our town halls, And our public meetings we've had in North Toronto with Councillor Matlow and the mayor and Councillor Cressy, they told us, you know, public health is important. And we listened to them, and that's why we fought the good fight, the good fight, and we ended up getting some reimbursement for those cuts that were planned because people spoke out and said public health is important, and that's why it's reflected in this budget, because we listened to people. So it's not just about the thing at budget time. This input, and we all receive it. You can't, I'm sure all of us can't go anywhere. You know, the Councillor Grimes goes to San Remo. I'm sure when he goes to pick up his donuts, they don't just talk about donuts. They talk about taxes, right? They talk about the taxes that they have to pay in a small business there on Kipling. Royal York's, okay. The best donuts in the city of Toronto, that's number one, no doubt about it. Anyways, I just think that we all should thank everybody who did all this great work over this while, and that we are not going to be able to satisfy all the crucial needs that the city faces.
Thank you, Councillor
But we'll try. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last speaker, Mayor Tory.
Speaker, and first of all, I have a motion, and the motion here is really just to say that dependent upon the results of the provincial and federal budgets on childcare, that we want to report on the implications of what they set aside, and secondly, to make a commitment, and I'll be the happiest guy in the room if they set aside a lot more money, and us committing ourselves to 20% involves us spending more money, because that'll mean more childcare. So it just says we're committing ourselves to the 20%, so it's very clear. And I've made that clear as well to the other governments when I've been visiting with them. I don't want to take away from the very consensual spirit that has been in the room, but I will just say on other motions, I will not be supporting the car tax motion. I will not be supporting the motions that have to do with TTC fares. I prefer the approach taken by Councillor Bradford in that regard, to have our people at the TTC have a look at how we could make sure we address this particular issue going forward. I will not support Councillor Perks' motion with regard to the housing commissioner. I think when the position is defined and when some of the work has been done, that's the time to look at budgeting, and I prefer, again, the approach taken by the Deputy Mayor bylaw. And I've thanked people earlier on today when I had the chance, and I just want to mention two other people I didn't mention earlier on today by name. One is Heather Taylor, who has taken on a very complex job, having come from the province of Ontario, where I think budgeting and finance are quite different, and working with our new city manager. These are two new superstars that we were lucky enough to retain at the city, and I want to thank you for your leadership, Heather, and your whole team. And the other, and again, I don't do it often, but so Sophia Arvanitis in my own office just works all year on the budget, and that's partly in response to the fact that I'm a bit of a bear for punishment on wanting to be involved in the detail of the budget and working with all of you, and she helps me to keep informed on it, and I just want to thank her for her leadership in that regard. So we've talked today in a terrific, I think, constructive debate about the fact that the budget achieves many different things. It maintains and improves services, especially for some of the most vulnerable and at risk, and I'm really proud of the additional investment we're making in kids and families and neighborhoods. It improves efficiency in many different respects. It invests for the future through the City Building Fund and otherwise when it comes to transit and housing. It does help to keep the city affordable. This is a challenge because as we invest and as we hire more frontline service people and so on, it becomes, somehow it has to be paid for, but I think we've taken a number of measures and will continue to do so to keep the city affordable, and I think it does protect our success. And as Deputy Mayor Bylaw said, the word that's maybe been used most frequently, including by me, is this word balance. And of course, the budget itself is balanced, which is a requirement of the law, but it is, there's been a lot of balancing of interests and a lot of collaboration, some compromising that's had to be done so that we could move forward on the one hand, but do it on the other hand in a way that was affordable for the people that we serve. And there are people who wouldn't hire the 300 police officers, and they wouldn't hire the 121 bus drivers, and they wouldn't hire the 60-plus paramedics, and on the list goes. And they would prefer to go back to the days of slashing bus routes and having things just not addressed. And there are other people who would raise taxes far higher than and expand the reach and the role of this government. And the biggest problem I have with that is that, first of all, I don't think people can afford more than we're asking them for. A lot of people can't. But secondly, by so doing, I honestly believe we are, unconsciously or otherwise, allowing the downloading of things onto this government and onto the property taxpayers of the City of Toronto that are not the proper responsibility of those groups of people, the same group of people. And so I'm for the art of the possible with hopefully an extra dose of courage and ambition that I think we've built in to this budget, thanks to some of the decisions we took earlier on with the city building fund and whatnot. I think that we have to lead in this place, but I think that we have to maintain the confidence and support of the public in leading. And I've taken that approach with respect to the supervised injection sites, bike lanes, which is you lead, but you don't get too far ahead of the public so that you can maintain their confidence. And I think this budget, including the City Building Fund initiative taken in December, will maintain the confidence of the public because they know, because we've taken the time, we're doing things in a rational kind of reasonable way that these investments we're making are necessary. You know, I think we are part of, and we shouldn't be immodest about this, one of the most best regarded governments in the country. And you know, I also looked at just at a number of the lists, and I think for all the work we have to do on helping people who are more vulnerable to lift themselves up and in building out the city and so on, I just listed some of the things, and you could give a longer list than me. 7th out of 140 cities in the global livability scale of The Economist. 11th out of 100 in global financial centers, 15 out of 1,000 in startup ecosystems, 3rd out of 50 in tech talent, 6 out of 60 in safe cities, 17 out of 100 best cities in the world from the Residence Economic Development and Tourism Index, 2 out of 100 in the world's most reputable cities. We've jumped 20 spots in the world's most reputable cities in the last 2 years. So it's not perfect. We know that. There's many challenges we have. We've discussed them here today. We're trying to address them. But there's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot to be hopeful about. And I think the budget makes those investments, and we have moved forward in that regard. And we need to focus on a continuing basis on more support for those who are struggling, especially affordable housing and supportive housing. I mean, that's a huge priority. The people told us that. Neighborhoods that need a hand up. We're making some steps forward in that regard this time. Modernizing and making more efficient the government itself. But in the end, I think we've got to protect our success. You hear me say this all the time. We've got to move in a measured way, keep the finances stable and well managed and respected by people. I think we can have, at the core of this, I believe, and I'll finish on this note, wealth creation. And wealth creation taking place in the city, which can only happen because people invest here and create businesses and create jobs here. That can continue if we do all of these things. And that will be the best thing we can do to help people to lift themselves up in the city and to take full advantage of the opportunity that is Toronto. And I think this budget does that, and I think it's one that is worthy of your support. And I thank everybody for the role they played in making this budget come to today's vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the staff will put the motions on the screen. So we'll have a 5-minute recess so we can get all the motions organized, okay? Okay, if we can put the first motion on the screen. Motion number 1. Okay. All in favor? Carried. Okay, second motion. We can put, so 3A. Which one do you want separate? All of them? There's only 2 parts. There's only 2 parts. What do you want voted on separately?
1 and 2.
Okay, on number 1? Recorded vote. Councillor wants it voted on separately.
Councillor Bradford, please. Thank you.
Councillor Grimes, please.
Part 1 of the motion carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Okay, part 2. All in favor? Carried. Okay. 3B. Oh. Part 3. All in favor? Carried. 3B. All in favor? Carried. Motion 4. Recorded vote.
The motion carries 24 to 1.
Motion 10C. This is the amendment. Recorded vote.
Councillor Carroll, please.
The amendment carries 14 to 11.
Okay, motion 5. Yeah, as amended. Recorded.
Counselor Pasternak, please.
The motion as amended does not carry. The vote is 10 to 15.
Motion 6B by Counselor Pasternak. All in favor? Carried. Motion 7A by Counselor Grimes. All in favor? Carried. Motion 7B by Counselor Grimes. All in favor? Carried. Motion 7C by Counselor Grimes. All in favor? Carried. Motion 8 by Counselor Perks. Recorded.
Counselor Matlow, please.
Counselor Pasternak, please.
The motion does not carry. The vote is 8 to 17.
Motion 11A. Counselor Bailao. All in favor? Carry. 11B. All in favor? Carry. Motion 2 by Counselor Bradford. All in favor? Carried. Motion 3C, recorded vote by Counselor Wong Tam.
Counselor Matlow, please.
Counselor Carroll, please.
The motion does not carry. The vote is 8 to 17.
Motion 6A by Counselor Pasternak. All in favor? Carried. Motion 9A by Counselor Fletcher. All in favor? Carried. Motion 9B by Counselor Fletcher. Recorded.
Counselor Matlow and Counselor Karygiannis, please. Counselor Bailao, please.
The motion carries 24 to 1.
Motion 10A by Counselor Layton. All in favor? Recorded.
Counselor Grimes, please.
Counselor Matlow, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Motion 10B by Counselor Layton. This is for a report. It's a report.
Counselor Perruzza, please.
The motion carries 15 to 10.
11C. Recorded vote.
Counselor Mallow, please.
The motion carries 23 to 2.
Motion 12 by Mayor Tory. On favor? Pardon? Okay, separate vote has been requested. Okay, on 1, recorded vote.
Counselor Karygiannis, please.
Counselor Pasternak, please.
Part 1 carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Part 2, recorded vote.
Counselor Mallow, please.
Counselor Wong Tam, please.
Part 2 carries 24 to 1.
Okay. So we do have votes, members of council that have declared an interest. Mayor Tory, you've declared an interest on 3. On the budget for technology services, Toronto Police, TTC, TCHC, as they pertain to expansion and provision of telephone, wireless, internet, and television services, and the budgets for strategic communications as they pertain to new summary services, and the budgets for transportation services as they pertain to the Rogers Communication Uplift Project. Okay, recorded vote.
Counselor Layton, please.
Counselor Pasternak, please.
The motions carry unanimously, 24 in favor.
Okay. Counselor Wong Tam. So you have an interest, declared an interest on the budgets for economic development and culture as they pertain to art services. Recorded vote. So we can ask the mayor to come back in. We did all of them.
Counselor Thompson, please. And Counselor Fletcher. Counselor Layton, please.
Counselor Fillion, please. Thank you. Counselor Perruzza and Counselor Pasternak, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Okay, so we have separate votes requested on standalone, which is recommendation 4. On favor? Recorded.
Councillor Bailao, please, and Councillor Layton.
Recommendation 4 carries 24 to 1.
Recommendation 142, separate vote, recorded.
Councillor Fletcher, please.
Recommendation 142 carries 23 to 2.
Item as amended, recorded vote.
The item as amended is adopted unanimously, 25 in favor.
Councillor Crawford, you have a motion to introduce a bill.
Yes, that leave be granted to introduce Bill 199.
Yes.
Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill, recorded vote.
Councillor Mallow, please. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Layton.
Councillor Perks, thank you. Councillor Filion, Councillor Wong Tam, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Crawford, please.
The motion to introduce the bill carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Shall these bills be passed and declared as a bylaw, recorded vote?
Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Cressy, please.
Councillor Crawford, thank you. Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Filion, and Councillor Wong Tam, please.
The motion to enact the bill carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Councillor Bradford, you have a motion regarding absentees.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. The City Council excuse the absence of Councillor Jay Robinson from the February 19, 2020 City Council meeting, and that we all wish her well in a swift recovery.
Thank you. All those in favor, recorded vote.
Councillor Bailao, please. Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Mallow.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Filion and Councillor Wong Tam, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Councillor Cole, you have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
Yes, I move that leave be granted to introduce the bill to confirm to the point of the introduction of this motion, the proceedings of City Council Meeting 15 on February 19th, 2020.
Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill, recorded vote?
Councillor Mallow, Councillor Karygiannis, Councillor Fletcher, please.
Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Crawford, and Councillor Filion, please.
The motion to introduce the confirming bill carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw, recorded vote?
Councillor Bradford, Councillor Mallow, Councillor Bailao, please.
Councillor Wong Tam, please. Councillor Carroll, and Councillor Perruzza, please.
The motion to enact the confirming bill carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Mayor Tory.
Oh, Speaker, I just wanted to say, because I wasn't aware of who was talking to Councillor Robinson and who wasn't, and Councillor Carroll says she hadn't spoken to her for a while. I spoke to her yesterday, and some of you may have, but she's in really good spirits. I mean, she's been through a lot, but she was in great spirits, and I won't get into what's going to happen next, but she's got more, more trials to come, but she's in great spirits going into the next stage of everything, and she really appreciates all the support she's had from this building and from all the people here, but I was just really impressed at how good her spirits were compared to, the last time I spoke with her, and so she's fighting the good fight, and I'm sure she feels the support coming from this room, so I just wanted to report on that.
Okay, I think that's it. So, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much to members of council, staff, everyone. Thank you. Have a nice evening. Don't forget to sign that apron, men.